He called me old school in front of the entire production team, smirked like he had single-handedly reinvented modern industrial efficiency, and proceeded to explain my own software integration architecture back to me using a PowerPoint deck he downloaded from a generic management consulting site. I did not bother correcting him. I sat quietly sipping the same lukewarm break room coffee I had been drinking for 16 years, watching Trevor Montgomery, fresh out of an Ivy League Master of Business Administration program, funded by his father's bank account, describe my quality checkpoints as legacy friction and operational bloat. That meeting in Conference Room B was my very first clear indication that this corporate restructuring had nothing to do with performance optimization. It was about personal authority and systematic erasure. My name is Vance Calloway. I am 49 years old, and I have kept the automated industrial infrastructure running smoothly at Apex Industrial Systems here in Dallas, Texas, since Trevor Montgomery was still in middle school. Corporate leadership often falls into the dangerous trap of believing that a quiet demeanor equals weakness. Executive boards frequently convince themselves that decades of practical technical experience simply means a senior engineer is set in his ways or unwilling to adapt to modern marketplace realities. That is precisely why high-level executives love hiring 28-year-old consultants, right up until those consultants demonstrate that corporate theory and real-world industrial physics operate on completely different planets. Trevor Montgomery did not know the fundamental difference between International Organization for Standardization Compliance and a fast food order. He genuinely believed that Federal Food and Drug Administration regulatory checkpoints were optional guidelines designed merely to slow down quarterly throughput targets. Yet, through corporate nepotism, this walking case study in unearned privilege landed the executive title of Director of Operational Excellence. There were no open job postings, no competitive interviews, and 0 days of shop floor experience required. He arrived with nothing more than a recycled vocabulary of corporate buzzwords, a slick suit, and a last name that caused human resources to nod eagerly, like bobblehead dolls on a bumpy highway. Before Trevor showed up, my daily routine at Apex Industrial Systems was predictable in the best way possible. I personally engineered that predictability over 16 painstaking years, system by system, server by server, and database by database. I originally arrived at Apex back in 2007 as an independent software integration consultant. At the time, Apex was struggling through a complex merger with Henderson Global Manufacturing. They desperately needed an elite systems architect who could bridge two completely incompatible database engines without shutting down active production lines. I was the specialist brought in to solve what everyone else called an impossible technical puzzle. Back in those early days, Harrison Montgomery was not the omnipotent chief executive officer he claims to be today. He was merely the vice president of operations, hungry for career advancement and terrified of disappointing the board of directors. In 2007, Harrison would walk the production floor every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, carrying a paper coffee cup, eagerly asking me for updates on database synchronization rates. We built a solid professional relationship based on mutual respect. He respected my technical brilliance, and I respected his commercial drive. When Harrison formally offered me a full-time executive role as senior systems architect in 2008, it felt like joining a premier enterprise where technical competence still mattered above office politics. Over the next decade and a half, I built every core software integration framework that Apex relied upon. I personally trained every junior systems engineer and database analyst hired by the company. I guided 3 successive plant managers through grueling federal compliance audits, emerging every single time with 0 regulatory violations. I even spent 6 tedious months mentoring Harrison's previous golden boy, his nephew Julian Montgomery, teaching him enough about industrial, enterprise resource planning architecture that Julian managed to appear competent before transferring to corporate headquarters down in Houston. Quality control systems ran seamlessly, production quotas were consistently met, and our facility achieved 8 consecutive years without a single regulatory infraction. In fact, when an auditor from the Federal Food and Drug Administration conducted an inspection in 2019. She praised our real-time audits trail system as one of the cleanest, most transparent documentation setups she had ever encountered in manufacturing history. That legendary track record meant nothing to Trevor. He wanted to make his personal mark on the company, and he wanted to do it fast. He had been in his newly appointed office 11 days when he summoned his first mandatory efficiency review meeting. He marched into conference room B, clutching a stack of printed color charts, exuding an overwhelming confidence. His presentation contained 47 individual slides. I counted every single one of them. "What we are looking at here," Trevor announced, clicking pompously to a colorful bar graph he had lifted straight from a consulting white paper, "is massive operational bloat disguised as conservative quality assurance. We are wasting hundreds of labor hours on redundant verification checkpoints that dramatically slow down production throughput without adding measurable financial value to the bottom line." He used that exact phrase, measurable financial value, 12 separate times within 30 minutes, speaking with the breathless enthusiasm of a young child who had just discovered fire. The first critical protocol Trevor targeted for total elimination was my twin signature vendor validation system. Under that system, whenever Apex onboarded a new component supplier or modified raw material specifications, two independent authorizations were legally required, one from procurement engineering and one from quality assurance. I had designed and implemented that protocol back in 2009, immediately after an unvetted vendor supplied defective structural alloys that resulted in $67,000 worth of scrapped finished goods and a brutal legal dispute. This dual signature protocol creates unnecessary administrative friction in our vendor relationships. Trevor proclaimed to the room of 8 senior professionals, most of whom had been working in high-tech manufacturing longer than Trevor had been alive. "We need to streamline executive decision-making and eliminate internal bottlenecks that prevent Apex from remaining agile in a competitive market." I raised my hand calmly. "Trevor, that validation protocol has intercepted 3 catastrophic component defects in the last 18 months alone. Without those mandatory dual signatures, unvetted raw materials would have passed directly onto the main assembly line, causing severe regulatory non-compliance and potentially exposing Apex to federal product recalls." Trevor offered the room that insufferable smile that young managers reserve for senior staff. "Vance, I appreciate your old-school dedication to quality, but modern corporate strategy requires us to balance perfection with operational velocity. Industry data shows that 97% of vendor shipments pass basic inspection without issue. We are currently designing our entire operational architecture around a tiny 3% exception rate. Those 3% exception cases represent over $150,000 in potential material destruction per incident." I replied evenly. "Not to mention potential federal enforcement actions that could freeze our entire manufacturing line for weeks. That is precisely the kind of fear-based thinking that keeps mature organizations stuck in the past," Trevor declared, clicking to his next slide. "Modern enterprises must embrace calculated operational risks and trust their strategic vendor partners." Trusting unverified vendor partners was a fantasy dreamed up by someone who had never stood on a noisy factory floor during a major system breakdown or fielded a furious phone call from federal regulatory inspectors. But I did not waste my energy engaging in an emotional debate. I simply nodded, noted his points, and remained quiet. Arguing with an entitled boss's son in a public meeting is useless. The meeting concluded with Trevor's efficiency initiative receiving immediate formal approval from his father, Harrison Montgomery. The authorization document bore 5 executive signatures, including my own, because an experienced professional knows exactly when to pick his battles. That afternoon, I created a hidden directory on my secure workstation. I named it Audit Ledger. It was a cold, objective database tracking every single operational change Trevor forced into production, recording predicted savings versus real-world impact. I had a strong suspicion that I would need every bit of that data sooner than anyone expected. If you are following this corporate stories, Please take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps us share these detailed, high-stakes workplace stories with people who appreciate real professional strategy. Trevor's second week at Apex Industrial Systems began with what he designated as a comprehensive operational audit. He scheduled mandatory one-on-one sessions with every department head, armed with a tablet displaying colorful performance metrics and corporate buzzwords. I was scheduled as his 3 o'clock appointment on Tuesday afternoon. Trevor had taken over the corner suite formerly occupied by Eleanor Hayes, our retired quality director. The walls were plastered with printed trend lines, and a whiteboard was covered in process flow diagrams. "Vance, thanks for making time," Trevor said, without looking up from his tablet screen as I walked into the suite. "I have been conducting a deep dive into your back-end integration architecture, and I have identified several high-impact optimization opportunities that can be implemented immediately." I sat down in the leather armchair across from his desk, keeping my hands folded calmly. In my 16 years at Apex, I had learned that whenever an unseasoned executive claims to have identified optimization opportunities, it invariably means he is about to hammer away at a foundational beam he does not realize is holding up the entire roof. "Your vendor onboarding platform," Trevor continued, making eye contact, "is creating unacceptable administrative latency. Average processing time is 3 2/10 days for new supplier verification. Benchmark industry standard is 1 8/10 days. Those 3 2/10 days include automated background checks, third-party liability insurance verification, environmental compliance screening, and legal review," I explained patiently. "Last year, that rigorous vetting process caught 2 separate vendors submitting expired insurance certificates and another vendor concealing an active environmental enforcement action. Without those mandatory verification buffers, Apex would have inherited massive legal liabilities that could have bankrupted us." Trevor waved his hand dismissively. "But we are losing high-velocity supplier partnerships because our onboarding bureaucracy is far too sluggish. Statistical models show that if we compress our clearance timeframe to 1 8/10 days, we will capture approximately $23,000 in annual procurement cost savings." Trevor, a single environmental violation fine from federal regulators starts at $45,000 for an initial breach. A single unverified liability claim from an uninsured vendor could cost Apex upward of $200,000 in legal exposure. That day and a half of careful verification saves this company more money in 1 quarter than your faster onboarding will generate in an entire decade. That is classic risk-averse friction, Trevor shot back, making a note on his tablet. "We cannot permit our operational velocity to be held hostage by extreme, worst-case scenarios." "We do not build industrial systems for worst-case scenarios," I replied. "We build them for realistic, historical realities." Like the raw material supplier last March who attempted to submit forged clearance documents to bypass safety protocols. My verification algorithm flagged the discrepancy within 2 hours. Without that automated barrier, Apex would have faced federal regulators breathing down our necks with severe sanctions. "An isolated anomaly," Trevor insisted, looking at me as if I were stubbornly arguing that the earth was flat. "Vance, I respect your long tenure here, but experience without flexibility rapidly becomes operational stagnation. We must evolve our baseline protocols if Apex intends to maintain its market position against aggressive competitors." That was the exact moment Trevor unveiled his master innovation. A streamlined vendor onboarding system that completely stripped out what he labeled redundant verification stages. Dual signatures were abolished. Third-party insurance confirmation was downgraded to a self-reported checkbox. Environmental clearance cross-checks were eliminated entirely. The new protocol promised complete vendor approval within 24 hours. This will position Apex as the premier supplier-friendly manufacturer in the Southwest region. Trevor declared, with the passion of a salesman who had never once appeared before a federal regulatory tribunal. He scheduled an aggressive implementation timeline, entirely ignoring my written technical objections. I returned to my desk, opened my hidden audit ledger, and recorded the entry. Vendor onboarding compression, predicted impact. severe compliance breakdown, and unhedged third-party legal liability, the new streamlined onboarding system went live on Wednesday morning. By Friday afternoon, Trevor sent a company-wide email boasting that Apex had approved 3 new primary material vendors in record time, hailing the achievement as a paradigm shift toward modern operational excellence. The reality of that paradigm shift struck early Tuesday morning. I received an urgent phone call from Russell Davis, our senior procurement manager, one of Trevor's newly fast-tracked suppliers, designated in the database as vendor number 2, had permitted their commercial liability coverage to lapse 2 months prior. The vendor had submitted outdated documentation, and because Trevor had eliminated our mandatory third-party verification protocol, nobody had bothered to call the insurance carrier to confirm active coverage. Vendor number 2 currently had $50,000 worth of unhedged industrial machinery operating directly on our main production floor, completely uninsured. I immediately drafted a concise email to Trevor, attaching the procurement report, operational alert, vendor number 2 operating on active production floor with 0 confirmed liability insurance, immediate risk exposure. Trevor's reply arrived 3 hours later. Thanks for flagging. Let us focus our energy on constructive solutions rather than dwelling on temporary implementation bumps. Constructive solutions. As though the obvious solution was not the very verification check he had arrogantly stripped away 5 days prior. But the situation deteriorated even further by Thursday morning. The second fast-approved supplier submitted environmental clearance paperwork that appeared authentic at first glance. However, when our internal compliance officer ran a routine background search, she discovered that the registration clearance number actually belonged to a completely different corporate entity in Ohio. Trevor's fast-tracked vendor had engaged in outright federal document fraud under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001 to bypass standard compliance delays. I immediately composed a second formal alert to Trevor. Document Integrity Alert. Vendor number 2 clearance paperwork appears fraudulent under federal statutes. Recommend immediate suspension of vendor access pending legal investigation. Trevor responded within 15 minutes. Let us not jump to premature conclusions or disrupt vendor relationships. I will schedule an informal alignment meeting with vendor leadership to review documentation discrepancies. Review documentation discrepancies. You do not schedule an informal alignment meeting to review whether a contractor committed federal document fraud any more than you ask a burglar politely if he intended to steal your valuables. I printed both email exchanges, placed them securely inside a physical binder in my locked desk drawer, and took an unprecedented step. I drafted a comprehensive, formal risk assessment memorandum. I addressed it directly to Harrison Montgomery, copying Chief Legal Counsel and our Corporate Risk Management Liaison. The memorandum was 2 pages of bulletproof technical analysis detailing how the elimination of vendor verification protocols created immediate, unhedged financial exposure and potential federal compliance liability. I did not mention Trevor by name once. That was completely unnecessary. The timeline of events made the origin of the crisis transparent to anyone. Harrison's reaction came early the next morning. It was not an email reply. His executive assistant called my extension. Mr. Calloway, the CEO requires your presence in his suite immediately. When I entered Harrison's executive office, he was seated behind his mahogany desk, my printed memorandum lying open in front of him. His expression was not outwardly furious, but it carried that cold executive frostiness that signals deep corporate displeasure. Vance, I received your formal risk memo, Harrison began, his tone tight. These vendor anomalies you detailed, are you implying they are a direct result of Trevor's efficiency initiatives? The chronological correlation is exact, I answered calmly. The compliance failures emerged immediately following the removal of our mandatory verification protocols. Have you discussed these technical concerns directly with Trevor? Harrison asked, leaning back in his chair. I flagged both critical failures to Trevor via email immediately upon discovery, I replied. He indicated a preference for informal vendor alignment meetings rather than immediate suspension pending legal investigation. Harrison stared at me in silence for several long seconds, tapping his pen against the desk. Vance, you have been with Apex for 16 years. You are a highly compensated technical expert. But Trevor is implementing necessary modernizations to ensure this company remains competitive. I need to know that you are actively supporting his leadership, rather than seeking out technical reasons why his initiatives might stumble. I support operational protocols that protect Apex from catastrophic legal liability and federal regulatory enforcement, I stated firmly. That is not what I asked you, Vance, Harrison said, his voice dropping into a harsh executive register. I asked if you are prepared to align yourself fully behind Trevor's management direction. Yes or no? I looked at Harrison Montgomery, the man I had worked beside for 16 years, the man who used to walk the shop floor at 7 o'clock in the morning, asking for my advice. I support processes that preserve the legal and structural integrity of this enterprise, I said quietly. That is the only professional answer I can offer. Harrison nodded slowly, his eyes hardening. Then we have a fundamental operational problem. The situation spiraled out of control the following week. Having declared victory over vendor onboarding, Trevor turned his attention to production line flow optimization. He wanted to purge what he perceived as excessive quality assurance checkpoints along our primary manufacturing lines. Our manufacturing line relied on 7 distinct quality control checkpoints: raw material inspection, pre-assembly calibration, mid-process quality verification, final assembly testing, packaging integrity validation, shipping manifest review, and batch record archiving. Every single checkpoint had been instituted over 16 years, following specific operational failures. Trevor's newly published efficiency model claimed that eliminating 3 of those checkpoints, specifically mid-process quality verification, packaging integrity validation, and shipping manifest review, would increase line throughput by 12% while cutting $180,000 in annual direct labor costs. He presented his plan directly to the executive board. I was not invited to that meeting. I learned of the decision when Laura Bennett from Human Resources forwarded me the mandatory transition schedule. We had precisely 2 weeks to dismantle the 3 quality stations and reassign the inspection personnel. Eliminating those 3 specific stations was operational madness. The mid-process quality station had caught a severe thermal calibration failure the previous year that would have destroyed $45,000 worth of precision components had it reached final assembly. Packaging integrity validation had caught mislabeled product shipments 6 times in 18 months, preventing customer rejections and massive contract penalties. Shipping manifest review had intercepted invoicing calculation errors that would have resulted in $23,000 of unbilled product. Reaching commercial buyers, I immediately requested a private technical conference with Trevor. He squeezed me into his calendar on Thursday afternoon, between his corporate strategy session and a branding meeting. Vance, I am glad you are taking initiative to align with this rollout, Trevor said as I sat down. Your visible leadership is critical for maintaining team morale during process evolutions. Trevor, I am formally advising against eliminating the mid-process quality station, I said, placing a technical report on his desk. That station provides an essential safety net for thermal calibration drift. I have analyzed the empirical data, Trevor replied smoothly, pulling up a chart on his laptop. The mid-process station captures defect anomalies in approximately 2 3/10% of production runs. We are incurring substantial labor overhead to catch a statistical outlier. Those 2 3/10%, over $200,000 in potential material destruction annually, I countered. The operational cost of running that inspection station is roughly $35,000 per year in labor. That station delivers a 6-to-1 return on investment. Trevor closed his laptop with a sharp snap. But if we eliminate the station and absorb the occasional statistical loss, our net profit increases due to the 12% boost in overall throughput. The arithmetic is clear, Vance. The arithmetic changes instantly. When federal regulators get involved, I warned him. If non-compliant medical components reach commercial clients, we face mandatory federal product recalls, facility enforcement actions, and potential criminal oversight under Title 21 regulations. Those costs do not appear on your presentation slides. Vance, this is the exact same conservative friction that prevents legacy companies from scaling, Trevor said condescendingly. We cannot run a modern manufacturing facility based on nightmare scenarios that may never materialize. They are not hypothetical nightmare scenarios, I said evenly. They are documented historical events that occurred right here before we built those safeguards. That historical data is obsolete, Trevor stated coldly. We must trust our streamlined operational velocity. I left his office and immediately placed a secure call to Evelyn Drake, a senior regulatory compliance officer with whom I had coordinated 4 successful federal audits over 16 years. Evelyn, hypothetical scenario, I began. If an industrial manufacturer of precision medical components eliminates mid-process quality verification and shipping manifest auditing, what is the immediate regulatory posture? Evelyn's voice grew instantly serious over the phone. Vance, under federal manufacturing quality system regulations, those specific audit trails are mandatory for batch compliance certification. Stripping those checkpoints invalidates the facility's compliance standing. If non-conforming product reaches the market, it triggers mandatory federal quarantine orders, immediate facility shutdowns, and severe administrative fines. Why are you asking me this? I am conducting an internal risk review. I replied carefully. Vance, in 8 years of working with you, you have never asked hypothetical compliance questions, Evelyn said sternly. If Apex is planning to bypass mandatory quality controls, you need to fix it internally before federal inspectors walk through that front door. I sent Trevor one final, formal email, outlining Evelyn's regulatory warnings and offering to organize an official compliance review prior to dismantling the quality stations. Trevor's response arrived within 15 minutes. Your input is noted. We will proceed with the approved implementation schedule immediately. Please focus your efforts on training staff for the new workflow rather than manufacturing operational roadblocks. I printed that email, placed it inside my physical audit binder, and locked the drawer. The stage was set for a confrontation that would dismantle Apex Industrial Systems from the inside out. The emergency executive alignment meeting convened on Friday morning at 10 o'clock in conference room A25. Department directors, senior operations managers, and legal staff sat around the 30-foot mahogany table. The only empty chair was at the far end, completely exposed. Harrison Montgomery stood at the head of the room with Trevor beside him. He began by praising Trevor's efficiency protocols as the undisputed future of Apex Industrial Systems. Then his tone turned harsh as he targeted me, claiming that legacy employees were resisting modernization and sabotaging operational progress. Effective executive leadership requires absolute team alignment, Harrison declared, looking directly at me. When individual employees challenge executive decisions, create internal friction, and consult external regulatory bodies behind management's back, they actively sabotage our operational success. The boardroom fell silent. Harrison raised his voice, accusing me of insubordination disguised as technical concern. Then he delivered his ultimatum. Vance Calloway, you are hereby stripped of all operational project authority immediately. You are suspended until you stand up in front of this entire board and publicly apologize to Director Trevor Montgomery for undermining his authority. He added that if I failed to apologize by 9 o'clock Monday morning, I would be terminated for cause, forfeiting all severance. 24 colleagues stared in stunned silence. Trevor sat smugly, believing he had defeated me. I looked at Harrison calmly, stood up slowly, and said, I understand completely. Without another word, I walked out of conference room A, proceeded to my office, and locked the door. I retrieved the blue vinyl folder containing my original 2007 independent consulting contract executed between Apex and my firm, Callaway Integration Systems. I turned to Section 12, Subsection D. Consultant retains sole, exclusive copyright ownership, proprietary rights, and title to all underlying software source code, custom API database bridges, automated compliance engines, and derivative systems architecture developed by consultant. Apex Industrial Systems is granted a revocable, non-exclusive operational license. In the event of project termination or material breach of operational agreement without cause, all operational licenses terminate immediately. reserving exclusive licensing authority to consultant under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106. When Apex hired me full-time in 2008, corporate legal forgot to execute an intellectual property transfer agreement. For 16 years, Apex had run its entire $90 million facility on software engines. Belonging entirely to my private company, I packed my briefcase, left my keycard on the desk, and logged into my workstation backend. I executed a legal command modifying the system license parameter from active enterprise license to pending contractor renewal. Under embedded logic from 2007, the system initiated a 48-hour countdown before enforcing automated license restrictions. I walked out into the Texas sunshine, leaving the corporate trap ready to spring. Monday morning arrived, and when 9 o'clock passed without my arrival, Trevor assumed victory and emailed his father that legacy resistance was purged. But by Monday afternoon, the countdown expired. At 2 o'clock Monday afternoon, the automated production monitoring dashboard froze, displaying a warning banner. System notice, core license verification pending. Contact Callaway Integration Systems for license authorization renewal. Trevor instructed IT to reboot the server, but the locked system refused to clear, and database bridges stopped sending calibration updates to assembly machinery. By Tuesday, operational degradation became a full breakdown. Line technicians attempted manual inspections, but without mid-process checkpoints, defective components flooded assembly. At 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, Assembly Line 3 suffered a severe thermal jam, destroying $85,000 of precision tooling in 45 seconds. By Tuesday afternoon, shipping manifests locked down, invoicing modules froze, and purchase orders failed. The $90 million manufacturing plant ground to a complete halt. At 4 o'clock Tuesday, Harrison called an emergency meeting with IT and corporate legal. When he demanded that IT break the encryption, the lead engineer explained that the core software was locked by a 48-bit hardware token key owned by Callaway Integration Systems under federal copyright law. Chief Legal Counsel presented the 2007 contract file. Harrison, Vance retains exclusive copyright ownership under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106. Furthermore, under Title 29, United States Code, Section 2101, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Principles regarding constructive termination, suspending him without cause revokes our operational license. Harrison slumped in his chair. Counsel informed him that Apex was losing $250,000 daily and faced complete bankruptcy within 7 days if clients invoked non-delivery penalties. Desperate, Harrison ordered legal to call my mobile number immediately. My phone rang at 8 o'clock Wednesday morning while I drank coffee on my patio. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Harrison blurted out that the plant database was locked and begged me to fix the glitch. I reminded him that it was an automated license expiration under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106. When he appealed to our 16 years of working together, I replied that I was now an independent software vendor, enforcing contract terms. I presented my master services agreement terms. An emergency reactivation fee of $350 per hour for restoration labor. A monthly software maintenance retainer of $6,500 per month with a 6-month minimum commitment and full written technical veto power over all operational changes proposed by Trevor or any executive. Harrison gasped at the terms, but with no alternative, he agreed before the noon deadline. At 11 o'clock Wednesday morning, a courier delivered the signed legal contracts bearing Harrison's signature and corporate seals to my home office. At 1 o'clock that afternoon, I entered Apex Industrial Systems through the executive guest lobby, walking with the full authority of an independent partner holding complete technical leverage. Employees watched as I walked down the central hall. In conference room A, Harrison looked pale and defeated, while Trevor sat in silent humiliation. I escorted them to the server room, inserted my secure hardware token, entered the master decryption key, and executed license reactivation. Instantly, server rack lights turned solid green. Production monitors reactivated, assembly lines restarted, and automated FDA audit logs initialized. Within 15 minutes, assembly lines were humming smoothly across the facility. I then presented 3 formal technical revocation orders to Trevor. Order number 1 restored the twin signature vendor verification protocol and suspended vendor number 2, pending legal insurance verification. Order number 2 reinstated the 3 eliminated quality assurance checkpoints. Order number 3 mandated that all future efficiency proposals from Trevor's department undergo 30 days of technical review by my firm prior to executive consideration. Trevor protested that his authority was being stripped, but I reminded him that while he held a title, I held the intellectual property powering the company. Harrison ordered his son to sign, and Trevor signed every document with a shaking hand. Over the next 6 months, Apex achieved complete operational stability. Defect rates dropped to 0, and our automated audit system passed a surprise federal FDA inspection with highest honors. Working 20 hours a week as an independent consultant, my retainer and hourly fees doubled my previous annual income. I spent my extra time traveling and consulting across Texas. Trevor was reassigned to managing office supplies, while Harrison retired early 18 months later, turning corporate governance over to a professional board. Looking back, my actions were not about revenge. They were about professional self-worth, legal foresight, and operational reality. When corporate executives demand submissiveness and try to sacrifice your reputation to cover for nepotism, do not engage in shouting matches. Protect your intellectual property. Document every compliance failure. Know your legal rights under federal law, and maintain your composure. When arrogant theory collides with real-world physics, those who built the foundation will always hold the keys to the castle.